Government shutdown is looming, so what hazards does that pose to the security of the United States? Well, the Department of Defense has just released an instruction called Contingency Plan Guidance for continuation of essential operations in the absence of available appropriations. Let's go over some of the details. So there are a total of 8,244 DoD civilians. Of that total population, 45% of them are expected to be either legally exempt because they are not funded in annual appropriations, or are accepted from furlough because they perform tasks that are necessary to protect life and property. Now, meanwhile, 2,074,000 uniformed service members shall continue to perform duties during a lapse in appropriation. The other thing that DoD has announced is that support for Ukraine shall be specifically accepted to ensure continuity of Ukraine's support for ongoing combat operations. So let's talk about that approximately 2.1 million uniformed service members and what they're going to do after the shutdown. So the instruction says military personnel on active duty will continue to report for duty and carry out assigned duties. This includes duty involving accepted and, to the extent they can be performed without incurring new obligations, non-accepted activities. Military personnel on active duty may be assigned to carry out non-accepted activities in place of furloughed civilian personnel, only to the extent that non-accepted activity is capable of performance without incurring new obligations. So potentially our active duty troops will be doing the jobs of furloughed civilians as well as their primary duties during a shutdown. Accession and training moves associated with recruitment and initial entry training will continue, along with subsequent movement to the first station. So let's talk about procurement and acquisition. Acquisition professionals funded from multi-year appropriations with available balances from prior years are not required to be furloughed. Now, this is where it gets a little bit complicated in the procurement arena, so stick with me here. In operations and maintenance funded activities, DoD may only incur new 2024 obligations for accepted activities, such as safety of human life or the protection of property. After operating appropriations have lapsed for new obligations, the department may incur costs in advance of an appropriation only for those activities that have been designated as accepted. Such accepted situations include emergencies involving the safety of human life or the protection of property. New obligations may be charged to appropriation accounts or funds that do not expire for new obligation on September 30th to the extent sufficient unobligated balances exist. For DoD, after operating appropriations lapse, unobligated balances exist in accounts for procurement, research, development, test, and evaluation, military construction, working capital funds, and other revolving and management funds. All existing contracts already funded from the $320 billion 2023 DoD Operation and Maintenance enacted funding will continue unabated. New service contract awards from the soon-to-be lapsing $320 billion 2023 DoD O&M enacted, which will lapse on September 30th, 2023, are limited to the minimum amount necessary to execute specific accepted activities, where delay in contracting would create an imminent risk to the safety of human life or the protection of property, including endangerment of national security. A contractor performing under a contract or contract option that was awarded prior to the expiration of appropriations may continue to provide contract services, whether in support of accepted activities or not, up to the limit of the funds obligated on the contract prior to the lapse in appropriations. However, new contracts, including contract renewals or extensions, issuance of task orders, exercise of options, may not be executed, nor may increments of funding be placed on incrementally funded contracts or to cover cost overruns unless the contractor is supporting an accepted activity. So the bottom line is future Pentagon programs are on hold during a government shutdown. In the face of the rising China threat, this is a problem. The other question folks may have is, what's the status of my upcoming travel? I'm going to a conference or I'm supposed to go overseas to visit an installation. So how is that affected? Well, the guidance says temporary duty travel and conferences shall continue if targeted in direct support of countering Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or other terrorist groups. The guidance goes on to say, in the absence of appropriations, TDY travel and conference participation scheduled to begin after the shutdown occurs should be canceled. Now, meanwhile, there are some lawmakers who are trying to ensure the troops do get paid during a shutdown. Stars and Stripes reports the following. Lawmakers are scrambling to ensure troops will be paid in case of a looming government shutdown, including Coast Guard members who typically go without paychecks during the closing of federal agencies. Now remember, the Coast Guard personnel did not get paid during the last government shutdown because they fall under the Department of Homeland Security and not the Department of Defense. So this bill they're working on is trying to ensure that doesn't happen again. In the House, Representative Jennifer Kiggins from Virginia, a former Navy helicopter pilot, is pushing a bill that will keep service members paid if Congress fails to agree on a funding plan by 1 October. Senator Dan Sullivan from Alaska, a Marine Corps veteran, is leading a similar effort in the Senate alongside Ted Cruz from Texas, who introduced a separate bill focused on Coast Guard pay. The proposed military pay legislation guarantees the same paycheck protections Congress gave troops hours before the start of a 16-day government shutdown in 2013. The military was largely unaffected by the last shutdown in late 2018 because the Pentagon had a congressionally approved budget at that time, though the Coast Guard continued to work without paychecks for 34 days, as I said. The organization Blue Star Families said 1 in 3 military families has less than $3,000 in savings, a sum that is not enough to cover the cost of housing and childcare in most places. The Defense Department estimates nearly 1 in 4 service members has trouble putting food on the table. My good friend Kathy Roth-Duquet, who's the founder and CEO of Blue Star Families, says, putting our families at financial risk puts our national security at risk. We simply can't allow that to happen. And full disclosure, I'm on the advisory board of Blue Star Families and have been for a number of years. That's a great organization. If Congress does not pass protections for military pay, troops and civilian defense workers will receive back pay for any missing paychecks once federal funding resumes. So that's good to know, but as we all know, not paying your bills in real time can affect your credit rating. And in some cases, if you're already lapsed in your rent, for instance, you can get thrown out of your house. So this is a very complicated situation, and I'm not sure what the upside of a government shutdown is. And as hopefully you now understand better from what I've outlined here, there are direct impacts to the Pentagon that do hazard our ability to protect the nation. All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.